Hi everyone! Yesterday we read chapters 1 and 2 of the Parker Inheritance, where we learned about Candace Miller and her grandmother Abigail Caldwell, and we learned that her grandmother got into quite a bit of trouble for digging up parts of the city of Lambert, South Carolina, looking for some hidden fortune. So today I'm going to start on chapter 3. A few minutes later, Candace returned to her room to change clothes. Her mother had suggested they grab lunch at a Lambert landmark, and then she'd finally take Candace to the library. But not in those holy jeans, her mother had said. As happy as Candace was about finding new books and spending some time with her mom, she was also worried about her, specifically about her mom's looming writing deadlines. Her mother was a romance novelist. Jane Harris, Roberta Caldwell, Amanda Sandstone, she had written books under all those names and plenty of others. She always said she wanted to take a break from romance assignments to write her Anne C. Miller novel. But with the house sale dragging on, she'd signed up for 3 more projects, all with deadlines that would have been hard to meet even if she was writing nonstop. But she wasn't writing, seemingly at all. Instead, she watched a lot of reality television, visited Miss Jones across the street, and took long walks around the neighborhood. As Candace searched her dresser for more suitable pairs of jeans, she heard her mother in the kitchen, speaking on the phone in hushed tones. It was another reminder of how much smaller Grandma's house was compared to their place in Atlanta. Candace had always wondered if her parents had moved into their 5-bedroom house thinking that they'd have a lot of kids, and if they were disappointed when it ended up being only her. Well, well, look who's outside, her mother said breezily as they stepped out of the house 10 minutes later. We should say hello. Across the street, Miss Jones and her son sat on the porch, reading. Candace's mother had been encouraging her to walk over and introduce herself to the boy, but Candace hadn't seen the point. She would be back in Atlanta in 2 months. Why make friends when she was just going to leave? Plus, he was only 11 years old. She didn't like hanging out with boys her own age, much less boys who were a year younger. Hey, Juanita, Brandon, her mother said. We're off to grab a bite of lunch at PJ's and pop into the library. Care to join us? I just ate, Miss Jones said, before turning to her son. But Brandon hasn't had lunch. What do you say? Want to tag along with Candace and Miss Miller? No, thank you, he replied. He didn't look up from his magazine. Maybe you didn't hear her, Miss Jones said. They're going to the library, too. Brandon glanced up. How long will you be there? Brandon, don't be rude, his mother said. No, he's fine, Candace's mother said. We'll be there for a while, I imagine. I've been promising to take Candace since we moved here. Today seems like as good a day as any. Brandon and his mother stared at each other. It was clear that their eyes were having a private, silent conversation. He closed his magazine. Let me grab my wallet, he said, sounding defeated. Miss Jones smiled and motioned for him to stay. How about I treat? She rose from her chair. Let me grab my purse. I'll be back in a second. She entered the house. No one spoke for a few seconds. I heard you were an author, Brandon finally said to Candace's mother, breaking the silence. He had a short body and skinny legs. His high tops kept brushing against the porch as he rocked in his chair. Are you writing anything now? His voice was softer than it had been a moment before. Her mom fiddled with the clasp on her watch. Just a few projects, nothing serious. Are they, scary? Brandon asked. Or is it a romance like your other? They're secret, Candace said, crossing her arms. Her mother didn't like talking about her books with people, at least not when she was in the middle of writing them. It was one of her many superstitions when it came to her work. Brandon, your mom told me you're a pretty hardcore reader, her mother said. What types of books do you like? A little bit of everything, Brandon said. I guess I like boy books. What does that even mean, Candace wanted to ask. Books about guns and war? Books that only contain boys? What are your favorite authors, her mother continued. Brandon stopped rocking. I don't know, maybe Stephen King, James Patterson? He glanced at Candace and hesitated. Then he looked at his lap. You know, authors like that. Candace realized she was giving him a look. I like Stephen King and James Patterson as well, her mother said. Candace reads a little bit of everything too, she said. Have you read anything new this summer, Candace? Candace shook her head. Her mother knew she hadn't read anything new. That was why they were going to the library. "Look at us, a big group of word nerds," her mother said. Her grin was much too wide. Candace frowned at her mother. Why was she trying to force a conversation when it was clear neither she nor Brandon wanted to talk? After thinking about it for a bit, Candace realized what was going on. This had been a setup to get her and Brandon to spend more time together. But Candace was sure his mom was in on it too. Was Brandon? It didn't matter. She already had Dee Dee and Courtney back in Atlanta. She didn't need any other friends, especially not 11-year-old book snobs. Chapter 4. Candace's father used to always complain about their house in Atlanta. The uneven garage, the creaky stairs, the backyard that flooded every time there was a downpour. As they neared PJ's, Candace realized their house could have been much, much worse. Some of their buildings in the neighborhood, her mother had called it Vista Heights, looked like they'd topple over with one good gush of wind. Every other window had bars across its frame. She checked to make sure her and her mother's doors were locked. She didn't know where she and her mom would live when they moved back to Atlanta, but it wouldn't be in their old neighborhood. All the houses were too big for 2 people, and way too expensive. There was no way their new neighborhood could be as rough as this, could it? Brandon remained quiet during the trip. When he pulled into the parking lot, Candace unfastened her seatbelt and snuck a peek behind her. Brandon's door was unlocked. They entered PJ's and walked up to the counter. Old black and white pictures hung on the walls, and a weathered wooden shoeshine stand sat in the corner, collecting dust. The few people inside the restaurant stared at them. It was like the regulars could tell they didn't belong. "The daily special for me," Candace's mother said after staring at the menu for a few seconds. "Candace?" "Chicken fingers and fries." She had ruled out the special as soon as she read the menu. She hated fish with bones, and there was no way she was eating jalapeno and green onion hush puppies. Brandon ordered a hamburger and began to slide some money across the counter. Candace's mother stopped him. "Boy, quit and put that up," she said, and handed over her credit card. "My mom said," "It's fine," her mother said. "We're neighbors." Despite her mother trying her best to facilitate a real conversation, they ate their food, surprisingly good, Candace noted, as quickly as they could, then headed to the library. While Candace and her mother filled out forms for their library cards, Brandon bolted up the stairs to the children's section, not bothering to wait for them. It ticked Candace off, but only for a second, because with him out of the way, she could pick out the books she wanted without him judging her. The books at her old school were silly that way. The boys always made fun of her for what her and her friends read. Once upstairs, Candace walked up and down the aisles, pausing every few steps to pick up a book and inspect its cover. After making her way through the children's section, she moved on to teen books. She spotted Brandon sitting against a shelf with his knees pressed up to his chest. His face was literally buried in his book. She took a step closer to see what he was reading. Maybe he heard her, because he snapped the book shut and stuffed it behind his back. "Were you looking for me? Is it time to go?" Candace shook her head. "We'll probably be here for a while. Mom hasn't been to the library since we got to Lambert. It's like she stepped back into Narnia." "You read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe?" Candace felt herself smirking. "I read all 7 books in the series." She almost added, "even though I'm a girl," but decided against it. "I've never finished them. They're always checked out. I want to read them in order." She wondered if he was talking about publication order or chronological order, but asking seemed a bit too hoity-toity. "What you really should read is the Dark is Rising sequence, or The Hero and the Crown, or The Blue Sword," she shrugged. "I mean, maybe you won't like the last 2 because the main characters are girls, but I love those books!" He sat up taller. "And Aaron is one of my favorite characters." Neither one spoke for a few seconds. He reached behind him and placed his finger on the spine of his book, but he didn't pull it out. "What are you reading?" Candace asked. "Is it another fantasy?" "It's nothing." His hand slid away from the book. Obviously it wasn't nothing. Candace wondered if he was hiding the book because he didn't want her making fun of him. She hadn't realized that was a possibility until right then. "Do you come here a lot?" Candace asked. She used to always talk about books with her mom, but that seemed to be happening a lot less and less with everything else going on in their lives. Tori used to bring me during the school year, but the timing hasn't worked out so well this summer. It took her a moment to remember that Tori was his older sister. Her mom had mentioned her a while back. Can you ride your bike here? She readjusted her shoulder bag. It's not that far from your house. Mom doesn't want me riding by myself. Candace thought about this. Once she was sure of her answer, she said, I'm sure Mom and I will be spending a lot of time here. I bet we could give you a ride the next time we come. He blinked at her. At home, when I said I liked Stephen King and James Patterson, you looked like you wanted to reach out and knock me upside the head. Now she was the one who sounded like a snob. It's just, I don't think there's such a thing as boy books or girl books. I think there are people books. At least that's what my mom always said when my dad complained about what I was reading. I'm surprised she didn't say anything at your house. She was probably being polite, he said. Anyway, sorry about the way I was acting on our porch. I was kind of mad at our moms for forcing us to meet. I didn't know that they were planning that until right before you walked over. Candace smiled. At least she wasn't the only one being manipulated. So how many books do you have in your bag? He continued. You're only allowed to check out 10 at a time. I don't know. I stopped counting at 15. She pulled some out of her bag. I better return these. Wait, maybe we could share. You check out 10 and I'll check out 10. He pulled the book from behind his back. Have you read Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret? After an hour, Candace headed to the computer lab downstairs. Her desktop computer had crashed right before they moved. But Candace's mom wanted to wait until the fall before buying her a new one, which was easy for her mom, since she had her own laptop. Candace was the one forced to check her email on her mom's phone all summer. A man sat at the desk in front of the room. Sign up here, he said, nodding toward a notebook. Since we're so busy, we're limiting internet usage to 20 minutes per person. Once she was called up, she quickly made her way to the computer. After logging in, she checked her email. No new messages. She was about to go to her favorite puzzle website next, but she paused. She rubbed her grandmother's bracelet and then typed Abigail Caldwell plus Lambert plus fired. And I'm going to stop right there because the rest of this chapter will probably take me a few more minutes. And we are running out of time. So my two questions that I have for you are, what do you think Candace will find when she looks up her grandmother on the internet? And what do you think she'll find about her getting fired? And then why do you think that Brandon didn't want to tell her what kind of books he liked reading? Why do you think he said he only reads boys' books? So that's something to think about, and next time we will finish the end of chapter 4 and probably get through chapter 5. Bye, guys.